right. Hello, health heads. Welcome and thank you for checking into this dose of the Healthcare Uprising. I'm your producer in the back, Jeremy Carr, here with your host in the front row, Heather Pierce. So, what's on our agenda for today, Heather?
We're coming at healthcare at a very different angle today. So we've got Elizabeth Chabe, who is the CEO and founder of High Touch Group. High Touch Group is actually a marketing agency who serves the world of life sciences and engineering and biopharmaceuticals and healthcare tech and kind of that whole space that is under kind of the larger healthcare umbrella. Essentially working with the scientists and the founders and the inventors that create all the cool little magical things that end up in our hands or in our doctor's offices and all the things that actually help us at, kind of on the, we're the end users of. And so she's really here to talk about how she helps bring those products and those brilliant ideas to market so that we can all benefit from them. So
taking it from the lab to the shelf, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Cool.
We're learning somewhat how the sausage is made, or at least one little part of it.
I like sausage. So,
Yeah.
without further ado, here's our conversation with Elizabeth from High Touch Group.
Hi, and welcome to the Healthcare Uprising podcast. Today we have Elizabeth Chabe, CEO and founder of the High Touch Group. Elizabeth, thanks for coming on today. Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So this is a little different spin on our podcast. We often bring on the founders of like healthcare tech startups and things like that. Now you work with a lot of them from a marketing perspective. So and I do also want to plug that you are the author of a book, The Giant's Ladder: The Science Professional's Blueprint for Marketing Success. So definitely want to give you a little plug there. But tell us a little bit about your background, your experience, kind of what brought you to work in this world of science and engineering, the tech space, life sciences, kind of, and how that kind of plays into the healthcare universe or ecosystem, as I like to refer to it. So
Absolutely. I'll give you the abridged version and then you
perfect.
can, we can have more conversations, I'm sure, based on some of these things. But, I'm the CEO of High Touch Group, as you mentioned, and that is a marketing agency specifically for science and engineering companies. We work primarily in biotech and medtech spaces. My background is primarily in advanced materials research, managing research programs that were sponsored by the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, so force protection, primarily Department of Transportation, and so on, answering the question of how can we apply specialized materials that are stronger, more durable, perhaps more flexible, stronger in different ways, renewable, to large-scale structural applications, particularly in transportation, energy infrastructure, and defense infrastructure. And that was years ago, but that's basically how I got my start in the sciences, was managing these research programs at an academic lab at the University of Maine. There, myself and the director and a handful of other principal investigators raised funding for the state of Maine's largest R&D program, the offshore wind research program, which had a number of different research projects that spun out of it. But the goal, of course, was to begin the first offshore wind array in the United States in deep waters off of Maine's coast, where the wind blows very strong and where you're out of, the range of migratory bird paths or protected fish species and so on. And so that's how I got my start in research. From there, I realized that I did not enjoy working at the lab bench. That was never really my focus anyway. But I really enjoyed working with scientist entrepreneurs, people who were really interested in a very specific corner of the universe, quite literally, but had no idea how to access funds to support any sort of spin out company from an academic research lab. And while I was working in these different research programs, I was building my network within national research labs across the country: Pacific Northwest National Labs, Sandia National Labs, among many others, as well as academic institutions. And that's really where my first customer set came from, were these really industrious and genius level scientists and engineers who were solving really important problems, but had no idea how to enter the commercial market with them. And that was really my role, my primary role at this research center, or what it had kind of evolved into. So I essentially spun out the first version of my company, brought some staff that had been with me for years at the University of Maine, and we started High Touch Group, and that was almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And that's kind of a stereotype with scientists, isn't it? That they don't know how to, like, they're these genius level scientists that can conceive these theories and then prove them, and they come up with these great things, but then they don't know how to bring it to the world because they're not good with people.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's kind of a big shoes you're looking to fill there for the industry if you're trying to get those guys into the public like that.
And I would argue there's one other piece of sort of magic dust, right, that you're looking for. So it's those genius scientists and engineers, right, who have the desire to enter the commercial world, which they don't always, right? And that's when they bring on people like me or others like me, and there are plenty of them now. But then there's this other sort of special ingredient, right? And it's that that person who has a bigger sort of dream or idea about how their technology could enter the markets than others. Essentially, they have a product, even if they don't know it yet, that people want, and they're willing to go after it and sort of not listen to all the naysayers. So a lot of the scientists, they stop at genius, and maybe they bring on somebody who can help with those people skills, but it's a tiny fraction of any subset of people, really, not just scientists, but who are willing to kind of risk it all to be entrepreneurs in a pretty new space typically.
Sure.
Yeah. I always say we all have our gifts, right? We all need each other. And being a fellow marketer like yourself, I totally get it because I work with a lot of, even in, I work in the healthcare startup space. I've worked in healthcare for, 24 years. And I've often worked with like very technically minded people, engineers, product people. Heck, I'd even say actuaries, at least from like the healthcare side. They have so much wonderful information, but they don't know how to translate it into a way that makes sense for like the regular world, which is why we're having this conversation with you today too. I want to kind of point that out is that I think one of the things I want folks to get out of this is that there's a lot of super incredibly brilliant people that are doing amazing things, particularly in the academic space. And like, how do you get those from, like you said, to, I think you said lab, or maybe there's another word you use, basically to market, so that all of us as end users of the healthcare space, life sciences, and I want to talk about what life sciences means because I think the regular kind of Joe Schmo does not know exactly what life sciences actually presents as in our like everyday lives, and it's more common than they think.
Mm.
So it's interesting because it's like you need people like you to help these scientists and these you know engineers and whoever it is that are like coming up with these brilliant ideas to like bring it to us so that we can actually benefit from it, right? So
It's true. I mean, when you think about any invention, any scientific invention, especially something really complex, like the type of biological research that underpins so much of the biopharma world today, just as an example, which one subset of the life sciences, to your point, that those stories are slow burns. Maybe it's a 25-year from here to there, right? Especially if we're looking at a lot of preclinical compounds, they might have been discovered 25 years ago, but they're only reaching clinical stage maybe today. And obviously that's getting a little faster, but it's still a very slow process. It's a complex process, and most adults, especially in the U.S., likely stopped taking chemistry and biology at the high school level. So to expect the average person to understand complex biophysics and biochemistry is just not something that a good scientific communicator would try to do. And the scientific story is often filled with caveats. And because there are so many caveats, and if just a quick example, if you think of almost any pharmaceutical compound that's advertised on television, because of marketing regulations and so forth, you can't say what the compound does without also saying some of the adverse effects that have been found in clinical studies or in post-market data. And so, sometimes there will be these long lists of side effects, and but all of those little side effects, that's a caveat. There's a big story behind, somebody in a clinical study who got eczema because they took this compound, for example. And so that can be very difficult to understand to the general public, to explain to the general public, which is one of the tasks of marketers in this space, is figuring out how do we communicate in a trustful way, in a trust-filled way, but without necessarily going down the road of deep complexity that will be maybe misunderstood or not understood, or these roads filled with lots of caveats that can sort of erode trust if you're not very familiar with how clinical trials work, for example. And unfortunately, I think what we're all seeing right now in biopharma, in med tech, in a lot of these places where life sciences and engineering meet healthcare for the U.S. population, the products people want that they've been asking for years, at-home diagnostics, cures for certain things that just aren't getting enough research funding to be anywhere near cures. Somebody else is going to build a placebo that they will buy because they know that it's a pain point. And this is how we get beef tallow at the top of our food pyramid. Sorry, but and so I think that this is actually incredibly important and a really topical conversation as well.
Yeah. It's wild, right? Like, just to think about, it's the complexity. And I know this from being in the healthcare industry, not even being on the biopharma side, or even life sciences for that matter. Life sciences is not the same as what I have done. And it's complex, right? And it's got a long road. It is marketers, by the way, and here's just like kind of solidarity to like my marketing peeps out there in the world, anywhere in like the healthcare and like health tech. We have a really hard job. Marketing is not easy for the very things that you just explained. It's not very black and white. All those caveats, all of the kind of if then situations that you have to, account for. And so it makes our jobs really difficult. So,
True.
so props to you.
And you.
So, yeah,
We'll pat
yeah,
ourselves on the back this
we
entire
will.
show.
Yeah, good job. Good job. But I'm interested though, from like your perspective, right? Like where you sit kind of at the center of tech and healthcare and life sciences. What are you seeing that's kind of growing? Like what's going kind of off the charts, and I think for like the benefit of our listeners, like what's coming, right? Like what are we seeing? Because I think and that's part of what our show is about too, is to talk about these things. Like, hey, everybody, pay attention. There's a lot out there. It's really noisy. It's hard for a lot of these startups to get your attention, but there's some really good stuff out there. So maybe kind of like bigger trends that you're seeing, and like in that space. Yeah.
I think that at-home diagnostics, and I don't just mean a COVID test, a pregnancy test, a flu test, although those are incredibly, a lot had to happen for us to get a COVID test at home that works, right? But I think that at-home testing that is, a medical lab grade at home, the technology exists, the regulatory pathway does not, or I should say the pathway exists. The what I have heard a lot, I work about 50% of my workload is within the diagnostic space specifically, so diagnosing both at home or in clinical labs or in hospital situations. But the at-home testing space, I think, is just going to blow up in the next few years. And this is because while I don't agree with everything that is going on in the FDA restructuring currently, one of the things I do see that will probably be a net positive long term is this desire to bring more diagnostics diagnostics into people's hands, there has been this long trend that, you know, the FDA doesn't want somebody, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here from what I have experienced working with clients in this space for many years. I'm paraphrasing, but the FDA typically doesn't want somebody to learn that they have HIV at home. Right. That was something we heard for years. But HIV at-home testing is now available and plentiful. Anybody can go to, you know, a CVS or a Walgreens and buy these at-home HIV tests and take them in the privacy of their home and then determine their own next steps. Whereas for years, we heard the FDA doesn't want that. They want somebody to be diagnosed under the care of a medical professional so that medical professional can guide next steps. But what that turned into was a lot of people not testing. It created a barrier because not everybody could afford that testing. Not everybody wants to go to a low-cost clinic or can take time off of work. You know, there were all of these barriers, right? And now we're seeing more people take these tests and diagnose at home. And we're seeing this not just in HIV, right, but in lots of different areas. So the technology for blood-based testing, which is much more accurate in a lot of ways than some of these one-off tests, like a lab in a box that you could keep in your home bathroom and test, you know, what do you have? Flu A, B, none of the COVID or none of the above. Not just a one-off, but over time, as well as track, you know, your vitamin D levels at home, different hormones at home. There are all sorts of markets for an at-home testing sort of all-in-one lab, or something that some sort of technology that collapses some of these at-home tests that right now you're buying one-off from lots of different vendors, and you're not tracking it in your medical health records. So having the ability to sort of sync all of this up, empowering the patient to have access to all their medical records and these tests over time, and being able to run them at home and not be gated by insurance or being able to get in to see a doctor, I think is a really important trend. And I think we're going to see this in everybody's home in 10 or 15 years. It should be like the laptop or smartphone.
Yeah.
I found that very encouraging because we cover all that on this podcast. Like you almost just described our podcast and the things we talk about.
Yep.
But we've had all kinds of things like, at-home hormone testing and lots of different tests. But something else, one that stands out to me, I can't remember the name of the company, the core thing, the
PureBridge Health.
PureBridge.
Yep.
Yeah.
They can send people anywhere in the world a little monitor that they put on, and it's basically a cardiogram. It reads everything your heart's doing, and
like all the time,
and feeds it back to the home base. 24/7 heart monitoring in your home, and you could live in Flagstaff, Arizona, with us, essentially in the middle of nowhere, and you can have this. You could live in the real middle of nowhere, out in the places outside of Flagstaff, and you could have constant access to a cardiologist who has constant access to what's going on with your heart. So I think that's really, like, that to me feels like Star Trek. You know what I mean? Like that's next age, full on, like next generation healthcare there,
Absolutely.
Yeah. People want to control their health. We want more control of our healthcare. I think we always have. We just didn't have it. Technology, insurance just kind of dictated everything. And I come from the insurance industry, but I can say confidently that I think insurance is going to take a much bigger backseat as time goes on, because we are empowered through AI and technology and having those diagnostics in our hand or in our home or in an app or however that shows up, telehealth. I mean, and I want to ask you too, because you mentioned COVID, and High Touch Group has been around for a long time. I'm curious, like, what did you encounter during COVID? Like all these products, everything happened so rapidly. I have to imagine you were involved in something with that. That's like, wow.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we do a lot of are these scientific conferences. We curate from the content as well as the logistics and the marketing, scientific conferences on very specific topics. So all of those events got canceled. So that was sort of the downside, obviously, for us for COVID, but also, it had to happen. But the positive was that all of those scientists, all of those organizations that would typically come together around those topics, they were all really busy because they were the companies that were developing the supply chain for COVID tests, for example, for vaccines, especially if you can recall, a lot of the COVID manufacturing conversation was around lack of cold chain storage,
Hmm.
especially in low and middle income countries. And so I did a lot of work in some public health spaces around low and middle income countries and how do we get some of the supply chain built up there where we can to kind of reduce reliance on cold chain storage, as well as how do we get these programs funded that aren't relying on those technologies. I think that Moderna's vaccine was incredible, of course, and was very rapidly developed and was a great proof of concept for how we might do this in the future. But there are a lot of hurdles to getting that particular vaccine where it needs to go. And so I think for me personally and for High Touch Group, it put a lot of focus on how do we make sure that we can do this better as a world next time and not leave any countries behind like we saw happen in India. I was stationed in Vietnam at the time and obviously was
Oh.
seeing some of this as well.
Oh, that's right. You did mention that you were in Vietnam. Wow. I wonder what, I don't want to go down too far down the COVID hole here, but it is fascinating just because that was such an anomaly, like in terms of, kind of medically, right? And kind of at least not that I'm 48. In my lifetime, I had never seen anything quite like that. I mean, there was like HIV and AIDS in the 80s, but that felt more of like a slow crawl versus like, oh my God, everything's happening right now in 6 months. So it's kind of apples and oranges for me on
Yeah,
that one. Okay. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
like, yeah.
Oh yeah,
for
the
sure.
pandemics are a totally different thing. Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, it's just such a crazy thing to go through. Being in Vietnam, gosh, I wonder what it felt like to be there. Like, how different was it from being in the US going through COVID?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I had family in the U.S. and their experience was much different than mine in that
Mm,
where I lived, I was very lucky. My husband and I lived in Da Nang, Vietnam, which is in the center of the country. If you can picture Hanoi in the north and sort of a half moon shaped, Da Nang's right in the middle of that crescent on the beach. Beautiful place and a beautiful area of the world. And most people left. Most expats left. If you
mm,
were a Vietnamese family and you didn't need to be in the city and you had a country home, a lot of people left the city and they went to their country home. So we made the decision to stay in Vietnam because we strongly approved of the Vietnamese government's handling of the pandemic. They immediately closed the border with China. They ceased all flights coming into the country and just sort of people could leave, but you couldn't come back. So we had to make a
mm.
decision literally at the kitchen table. Do we stay here in this country where we hardly speak the language and where our family is so far away and we don't know how long the country will be locked down, but we might not be able to get home because there were no more flights. But we decided to stay there and we were there for 2 years. And we really, the only time we felt unsafe was when the Delta variant made its way from India into the country. And that spread so fast. And at that point, we basically said, okay, it's been 2 years. We need to get back to our families. We're going to go home knowing that we didn't know when we'd be able to go back to our home in Vietnam. And we've gone back to visit since, but we moved to Mexico instead of going back because we couldn't for about a year and a
Yeah.
half longer.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was just more of like piqued my curiosity. So, since we were
Yeah.
talking about COVID. So with High Touch Group, obviously in the work that you do, and again, knowing this from being in marketing, um, I would imagine that you're brought in with these new products, this new technology that they want to bring to the market. Maybe not in the beginning, right? Like they're at a point of development, and then it feels like the right time to bring marketing in and the role that you would play. So, do you ever get involved, or have you ever been involved with something that just didn't go anywhere, and like kind of things dying in the lab, so to speak?
Oh, all the
And
time.
like, right, I knew I
All
knew
the
the
time.
answer. I knew
Yeah.
you were going to say yes. What makes it so hard to bring these products to market? Like, what are the challenges that are faced? Like, how many good things
Yeah.
are we missing out on?
Good
You know?
question
Yeah.
there.
Man, it's such a good question, and it's a real frustrating one, and it's why a lot of us stay in this business. We uh, there are so many good products that die largely. I would say there are three primary issues, and I won't mince words. Yeah, we're among friends here.
Yeah.
um, the first truly is just the management team of companies, and that's just because managing a company is so much different than managing a lab where you receive certain operational base support from whatever facility you're based in, whether that's a national lab or university or some sort of research organization. If you've never had P&L responsibility, then you don't quite understand that pressure. Anybody who is an entrepreneur has ever been responsible for their own payroll knows what that
Hmm.
pressure can be, especially in the early days. And unfortunately, a lot of these early stage teams that are able to get an innovation maybe out of the lab and into maybe pilot scale, maybe some proof of concept, some early product market fit studies, they're not always the right team to take the company to the next level, if only because it can be a very uncomfortable process to go from, essentially a research project to a seed or a Series A level company. It's a
Hmm.
rough process, and I most scientists really do start companies because they feel like the world needs their products. But sometimes the world doesn't need their product. So that's number two is, a company isn't a product. A company is a one plus a next generation product, other products within that space, a service offering. It's more than one product, because if you find out that there isn't truly a market for your product or it's not ready yet, then or it can't pay what you can manufacture it for, and you don't have enough funding to discount heavily, then hey, you don't really have a company because you don't have customers. So first one's management team. Second's just product market fit was never really considered and it just isn't there. And then lastly is access to capital. If you're like most scientists in the United States, you were not born into wealth, and you might even have student loans by the time you're through a PhD or a postdoc program. And especially if you're a medical doctor, you probably have loads of student loan debt, which is just a very unfortunate situation in our healthcare ecosystem. And so most banks and traditional lending institutions won't give you the capital you need. And you do need to either go after non-dilutive funding, which, as we have heard over the last year, is increasingly difficult to get,
Hmm.
especially if it's for women's health or any of these particular niches. And you might not understand how to go after venture capital, or you might get taken in by an unethical funding situation, which I've seen time and time again. And so I think it is also very important for these academic institutions that these scientists are spinning companies out of to do a really good job within their technology transfer programs, their business schools, even in making sure that their scientists are connected to funding options that are appropriate for their stage and for their company type and their experience level and their own financial situations, because they can get into a lot of debt very quickly on products without markets, and with a lot of management and experience. So access to capital and ethical capital is very important as well. So those would be my three.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm thinking about so many. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've been in the healthcare industry for a long time, so my network's pretty deep. But a lot of the people that come on our show because they are startup founders, many of them are at JPM. Really fun to see them all at the same conferences, and I hear the same thing every time. They're all looking for money, right? They've got these things that they're in these pretty early stage companies that come on our show. That's really who we cater to, and they're all looking for the money. But the one thing I hear a lot, and this is, I would say, at any of the conferences that many of them have attended, because I'm connected with a lot of them now on LinkedIn, is that for the first time, women's health is taking a front seat at a lot of these conferences. We cover women's health really heavily on the show here too, which is exciting. It maybe in the past I would call it somewhat of an afterthought, years ago. So I'm curious with that. Oh, and also mental health, of course. Mental health has been kind of ramping up. I feel like that really got they really got the spotlight during COVID because telehealth became immediately such a needed thing. And so now you've got all these like mental health companies. Now they're not so much of like a product or a widget so much, or like something manufactured. It's more of a service. Um, but there are apps, there are diagnostics and things like that that I am starting to see, especially for women, actually, not even so much for mental health. What are you seeing in that space? Do you work in the women's health space quite a bit? Is that something that's kind of growing um, outside of in the diagnostic space? Because I think you said that was kind of like the number one, right? The kind of the number one
Mhm.
growth area.
Yeah, and it makes sense because there are so many women's health, I call them issues, but they could just be questions
Hmm.
that just haven't, that doctors aren't necessarily prepared to answer, that there aren't diagnostic tests that are readily available for, and that there certainly aren't necessarily at-home tools that women have access to in the United States. Now, there's some really interesting work going on in the EU around contraceptive, like non-hormonal based contraceptives, all sorts of really interesting stuff that I think is going to gain a foothold in the US here fairly soon. And I do hope that we continue to see this focus on women's health. I know at JPM, at ADLM this last summer, at all of the shows that I attended this over the fall and winter so far, have had a lot of emphasis on women's health. And you're absolutely right. It used to be sort of a track or a
Hmm.
maybe there'd be one talk on women's health,
Right.
if anything. Now there's a lot more. So I think that the word is getting out there, and there are a lot of really wonderful VC groups and accelerators that are heavily focused on women's health and bringing this next generation of companies to market. So it'll be
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited. Give me all the apps and all the things.
Do you have an example of something that stands out in your mind of a product you've brought to market that you think is going to help the world kind of thing? Just as like a specific example.
Oh man, I have so many. Let me think of a good one here. I mean, I think that honestly, the one I
I don't
think
want
that
to discount the other ones. I just want to hear like an
yeah,
example of
Yeah,
one.
real
that's why I
real life
always that's why I
example.
always feel bad because I'm like, oh no, who do I pick? So I'm gonna fall back on the offshore wind program just because I think that that technology has the potential to completely revolutionize electricity delivery across the United States. It's a renewable resource. Wind blows so strong off of both coastlines. There are some amazing environmental tools and technologies and analytics tools, especially that came out of some of that research to help do this all in a very sustainable, ethical way. And I think if we could reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, on coal, I think that that would be one of the great level sets, both for human health as well as just for really everything. And especially as we
Yeah,
enter into this like this AI based worlds where
so
we're
true.
going to yeah, right. I mean, we're just using so much water and so much energy that we do really need to figure out a sustainable way to do this. So I still obviously have one foot still in the that renewable space. In terms of healthcare, there's a company that is not one of my clients, but I do work with them in that their founder speaks at a conference that I run, and she's just brilliant. I love when she's on stage because she's captivating, and she's built a really interesting women's health company called INNE in the Europe for non-hormonal birth control. So that's who I was thinking
Oh,
of when I was talking about that. And I think that hopefully someday will be available for all women. But they have gotten clearances in the EU, and I know they've seen a lot of really exciting growth. And it's just such a great company story as well, with a lot of values, corporate values around women's health and the environment and how we do this sustainably. So I'd love to see more companies like that finding a foothold here in the United States.
Sounds like a future episode
yeah.
here on the Uprising.
Take notes.
I did. I wrote it down. But I actually really like your first point and it just showing how wide of a scope healthcare has, in
Yes.
that our energy production can actually have a major impact on our health globally.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
way we produce the energy
I love
that
making
we
that
live on.
connection that like actually I was like, wow, that's yeah, I mean to your point,
Yeah.
it's
It's a
everywhere.
wide scope. Like when you talk about healthcare, it's the way the whole world works is
It's
part
true.
of healthcare. It's
Yeah.
pretty wild.
Yeah. Such a yeah, healthcare is
Sorry,
everywhere.
my philosopher's showing again.
No, no, I love that.
true.
But I was thinking that it's like you're talking about essentially renewable wind farming, right? And how that
Yeah.
affects our health. Most people do not think about it. They're very separate things,
Yeah. They
but
just
they're
talk about the
but they're really
cost of
not.
electricity, like how much does it cost in my bill this month?
Right?
They're
Well,
not thinking about you got to breathe that air, man. You
I
got to
mean,
breathe the
It's
air.
true.
think about coal miners,
You
right?
got to drink
Coal
the water.
miners' lung. Like, there's a reason we don't want to mine coal anymore in
Yeah.
the mountains of West Virginia, is because it killed like an entire generation of men.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's a health
Absolutely.
problem.
And the power
It's a
plants
huge
are
health
killing the
problem.
rest of us,
True.
really.
It's
Like,
true.
if you really want to
It's
get down
true.
into it.
It's true. And we're using only more energy because of data centers and AI. And, and I think it's, I don't think stopping progress, scientific progress, technological progress makes a ton of sense. I wish that we could put the brakes on some things so that we could build
Hmm.
some infrastructure in order to do things more sustainably. But assuming that that won't be the case, I think that really focusing on where these renewable resources are, as opposed to immediately going to nuclear, which is what the AI companies are really heavily
Right.
focused on, and then we're creating forever waste, which has its own issues. So I think offshore wind really is important for our health, but also just sort of what does scientific research look like in the future without AI? Well, we're going to need a lot of electricity and a lot of clean water in order to make those scientific breakthroughs that we've been promised by AI happen. So hopefully
Yeah.
we can do it sustainably.
Well, the one thing we have going in our favor is the renewables are now actually monetarily the cheapest way to make energy.
It's true.
So once the money goes the right way, it's going to go that way because that's really what drives it.
Hmm.
It's
So
true.
the
It's true.
simple fact that wind and solar are cheaper than any other way to make energy now, that's what they're going to build because it's cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
hope so.
I think it is going to swing that way because we have gotten the technology to the point where it is viable economically.
Might be a few years before it swings back,
Yeah, I
but
mean, hopefully we can do it before we're all dead, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. Oh my gosh. So I had mentioned earlier, I want to talk about life sciences a little bit because like medical devices, right? Manufacturing, people understand that. That's like, okay, that's like something that's made and then it like, I somehow it's a tangible kind of thing, right? For the most part. But life sciences is something, and everybody also knows mostly what pharmaceuticals are, biopharmaceutical is. But I feel like life sciences is one of those areas that is kind of like people don't really understand what it is. Um, and you work in the life sciences space. Can you talk a little bit about what you see coming out of the life sciences sector, and then like maybe some examples of things that you can share that really benefit us directly, and that might be in the hospital, right? It might be, I don't know, somewhere else. So,
Yeah, sure. That's a really great question. I mean, you mentioned medical devices, and diagnostics fall under medical devices. So pregnancy tests, COVID tests, flu tests, of course. Any medical device, it was developed by a bioengineer of some sort, and often with medical doctors, medical professionals, clinical researchers, and so on. And these are all trained life sciences professionals. I think what people might not completely understand is that when you're eating, broccoli, you're eating a genetically modified food. That's life sciences. When you're eating pretty much anything that has corn in it, which is basically any food in the United States that you can buy in the grocery store, unless it's meat or a vegetable, is that's life sciences. A lot of fuel that goes into your vehicles, if you're buying a fuel that has ethanol or any biofuel based products, that's life sciences. If you've taken a genetic test like 23andMe, or if you've done one for your dog, like in Bark, that's life sciences. So I think that perhaps one of the biggest misunderstandings that you allude to is that life sciences really touches somebody's life, not just when they go to the doctor or they get sick, but also the food they eat, the fuel they put into their vehicles, the paper they're reading, the water they're drinking. Pretty much everything touches some part of the life sciences. So it's a pretty fascinating field to be a part of. And, you know, when I talk about things like the offshore wind program, a big basis of that was the life sciences. It was the ecological monitoring, both of fish species, bird species, the environment itself, ocean wave height, water temperature, wind speed and direction, all sorts of elements. And that was all life scientists who we were working with to do that type of work. So really, it's everywhere, and it's a big field.
Yeah.
And it's life, right?
Right. Yeah.
It is. I mean,
it's
it
all
kind of touches
pervasive.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah, it's literally in everything. Yeah.
yeah.
That's fascinating. I hadn't really considered life sciences being part of like the wind farm thing, for example. So
Yeah.
yeah, we all got something to learn here. That's one of our goals is to educate and inform here on the Uprising. So
Awesome.
even we get to learn stuff. So that's great.
I love it.
Very cool. I want to talk a little bit about your book, actually. So The Giant's Ladder.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Jeremy's like big book nerd, so he's gonna love this.
Definite bibliophile over here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Me too.
Yeah, so the Giant's Ladder. So this basically you give scientists. I'm going to read this because I don't want to screw it up. You give scientists a blueprint for marketing success. What does that mean exactly? I mean, obviously you're the marketer. You work with the scientists who are building all these really crazy cool things, and it's hard to bring it to market. We've been talking about this. It's hard to bring it to market to benefit the people, right? And that's what we're here for. Um,
It's true.
like what is your advice to somebody who is going to do that, like, and how is this book helping to serve them and what their mission is?
Yeah. So this is the sorry, I talk all day about this. So and I have for about a year now. No, the a long time ago, I'd say about 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, I took a course that was sponsored by the National Science Foundation, and it since has been moved over to AAAS, uh, called Communicating Science. And it was designed to teach researchers how to communicate better with different audiences, including the general public, in order to build trust in research, in order to get projects funded. They were targeting government agencies, NIH, NSF themselves, and others. And how do you maybe spin out a company eventually? And I learned so much through this program. And sadly, this program sort of went away. Then it went to AAAS and went behind a paywall. And so for years, when I met a scientist who was maybe very early in their career, they were having a conversation with me because they were interested in growing a company, but they really weren't quite mature yet enough for me to want to take them on as a client. My agency, we service very specifically 12 to 15 clients a year, usually for many years. And so I'm not trying to just bring in lots of logos. So if I don't think somebody's ready for us, then we very specifically try to find other resources for them. And for a long time, that workshop was one of our resources. And then it went away, then it went behind a paywall. And so I had been asking myself for years if I could give the average scientist who is trying to spin a company out of their lab or trying to start something maybe for the first time, a set of resources and guidelines for how to get started before they hire a marketing agency and spend a lot of money, what would that look like? And so I had been basically working on this in various ways and experimenting with clients, with non-clients, people who just came for advice. And so over the years, essentially, I put together this blueprint for that sort of person, and that became kind of version one of this book. So it's been the methodology inside has been obviously modernized to integrate with tools and resources that are available today. But it's been adapted over 15 years of essentially iteration on how do you make how do you know if a trade show is valuable? to attend or not? And how do you plan for your first trade show experience? How do you hire a marketing agency or an internal hire? What does it cost? What should you be asking? What sort of questions? Importantly, the book really does start out with how to determine product market fit. I mentioned that's one of the top failure points in a lot of these early stage companies. And so honestly, if an entrepreneur scientist can do that part really well, then they can hire an agency and the agency can take that information and really run with it. But if they don't know, that agency is going to have to run some studies first to really better understand if there is product market fit. And of course, you best know before you start trying to raise venture funding. And so a lot of the target audience for this book is those scientist entrepreneurs who I want them to be ready for a marketing agency. I want them to be ready to go after venture funding. And this book hopefully positions them a little bit better to go after both of those things.
I want to throw a left field question out to you. You can choose to answer or not answer. But in the current state of affairs here in the United States around a lot of our I should say national government programs, NIH, National Science Foundation, CDC, things like that, we are experiencing quite an upheaval. I'm going to use, it's a nice word. How have you seen, Jeremy is like,
I got a lot of other words, but we can use that one if you want.
we're going to be nice. I mean, bottom line, and we say this, we're not a political podcast, but healthcare is political. I mean, it has legislation and laws and all the things. Politics dictate so much of what happens in this industry. Are you seeing, and I don't know if you can even speak to this, but are you seeing an increased level of difficulty for these scientists and these engineers and these inventors essentially of healthcare things? We're just going to put it in a big old bucket. Um, Getting to the stages that they need to get to with all of these kind of barriers and these cuts in place right now, I have to imagine it's got to be a hell of a lot harder.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, I think, on the foundations that are supportive in this space. And, what we have heard reporting on from STAT and others over the last week or so is that we're starting to see some of those programs that were frozen. We're starting to see, because of DEI terms or women's health
Mm,
terms, things like that, we're starting to see some signs that maybe some of that freeze will become unfrozen at some point, or maybe some of these grants will be re-reviewed. But obviously, it's not just the money that's part of it. There's also this sort of general feeling of morale loss, especially
yeah.
during COVID, when all of these healthcare workers and the inventors of these vaccines and diagnostic tests and so on, supply chain for all of this, they were heroes. And now they're not. And they're sort of, I think a lot of the current administration's perspective is that the market will always fill a vacuum. And what we see a lot of, like I mentioned, at-home testing has been something that for certain disease states, the FDA, for various reasons, has sort of been shy about authorizing at home. And there are other things that the market has asked for in the healthcare space, cheaper healthcare, greater
Hmm.
access, things like that haven't necessarily happened. And so what's happening is the market is filling a vacuum. And the way, you'll get RFK Jr. at the top of this is, credible science. If it's not building what people need and getting through, regulatory hurdles, then somebody else is going to get through and meet that need. And that's how you end up with beef tallow at the top of the food pyramid. It's not because of something magic or necessarily even something, you know, um, bad or nefarious, but because that story, that PR strategy worked better than the science did. When we have years of increasingly better nutrition science, peer reviewed, really well run studies, better run than we have ever had, completely ignored.
Right.
That is, those studies aren't telling the story well. and the PR surrounding that, the PR strategists surrounding them just aren't doing a good enough job shipping those stories and communicating them to the general public so that the average person can say, hey, that doesn't seem right. That seems a little illogical. And I think we do see some of that just based on sort of the public's reaction to the food pyramid specifically, but it of course goes beyond that to vaccines and so on. I think that if we continue to communicate in such a measured way and we can never be blunt or spicy or interesting in the way we communicate science, something's going to fill that void. And it could be, what's after RFK Jr., right?
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. Like science can be so exciting if you just present it right.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all they need. They just need that voice, you know. It's why guys like, you get Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku and Brian Greene, and like I can go on and on about those guys.
Bill Nye.
Bill Nye,
Yeah,
there you go. Like
yeah.
the ones who actually know how to make it like present it in a way that is interesting outwardly for people who don't already understand what they're talking about. And that's when people go, oh yeah, science, that's cool. You know what I mean? That's
Absolutely.
when it can shine. But yeah, it's hard to do with a lot of things, especially with the really complex, you know, products or theories or whatever it is you're dealing with. The more complex it is, the harder it is to package it in that poppy, hey, here's
Make it
something
cool.
interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it is that gap
Yeah.
that you got to kind of find that voice to bring and really shout down the propaganda because a lot of it is like you're up against, these propagandistic social constructs that have been around for generations that you're trying to break. Like that's a really hard thing. Like rewiring society a little bit with some of this stuff, right? Like the really bigger concepts. Even the energy production thing you're talking about, the shift from coal to wind. And look at how hard so many people are fighting against that simply because it's new and like it's not, this isn't how my granddad did it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that,
Sure.
but yeah, that's
I
the
mean,
point of science though, is we're not supposed to do it the way your granddad did it. We're supposed to keep doing it better,
Doing
right?
it better.
Keep doing it
exactly,
better. That's
exactly,
what science is for.
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, well, we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for fielding that kind of out of the left field question. I just felt compelled to talk about that because it comes up a lot. Because again, we bring on so many startup founders, and a lot of the research that they were using to kind of like feed their AI tool or their product, a lot of it was either cut, it was modified to a point because of the DEI stuff. I mean, even having like words like women removed. Like, come on,
Ugh.
like we're 50,
Yeah.
whatever. I will not go. I will
They
lose it.
scrubbed pictures of the Enola Gay
Yeah,
because it said gay on it.
there's yeah,
Yeah.
all those things, and
And
it's
that right there is the whole thing in a nutshell to me.
yeah, these people that are have these and many of whom that you probably represent and work for from your marketing agency, they're trying to do something good and to have that kind of knowledge, right? That those resources pulled or unavailable or cut or modified or whatever the word is. Like that hurts us as the
Yeah.
consumers in the end, at the end of the day.
It does.
So,
It does.
Yeah, and the more
And
people who are sick, the harder it is for everybody.
yeah.
Like it's
you're
bad for
so
all of us.
right. You're so right. You're so right. And, I think a lot of people shy away from asking the question you asked because they don't want it to veer political. And I'm not saying anything necessarily about the political situation. I think there are some positive things that this particular FDA might be able to accomplish
Hmm.
in terms of removing some regulatory hurdles or lessening some burden so that some other projects that really are products that are potentially really life changing for a number of people have a better shot at getting through.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're seeing some of this other stuff, and when we're not talking about it as an industry, when we're not really having serious conversations around the pros and cons of these executive orders and regulations that pass through, then we're at risk of, like you said, harming all of us. And so
Yeah.
it's an important conversation to have, and I wish more people would talk
Hmm.
about it and not shy away because it's a little political.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
we like it.
it just because it's political doesn't mean it's not also common sense.
Exactly. And
Like it's we. I mean, I remember the '90s, man. You could talk about politics openly,
yeah.
and it was a discussion. It wasn't an argument. We need to stop making everything about politics an argument.
Right. It is
supposed to be a discussion.
And I would say, as long as I have this podcast, right, and it could be, and hopefully years and years from now, I don't care what administration is in office.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to ask the questions because I think they deserve to be asked, and we should talk about it.
100%.
And I think too, like, one of the points of this show is to make people care about healthcare, right? Because it's always just been kind of fed to us, right? Like, this is how it is. Deal with it. Suck it up. Here's your insurance, whatever your premium, blah, 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 your network. Things are changing, and we need to understand what we have available to us. And so that is such a huge goal of the uprising, is to get people to start paying attention. You're not going to care about everything we talk about, but you should care about some of it.
I love that. Perfect. Yeah. I love it. I'm glad that you're doing that work, because
and I'm glad that you're doing that work, because the marketing, you can build a product, but you don't have somebody like you and High Touch Group bringing it to the people, presenting it in a way that is digestible and saying, yes, I want that. Then it's pointless, right? So you got a tough job.
Yeah, I'm glad all you guys are out there doing that work, because that just means I just have to produce the podcast.
Yeah.
Makes it easy on me.
And ask the tough questions.
I don't have to worry about the rest of it. You guys are already doing it.
There it is. Well, this is such a great way to end, I think, our conversation today. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. But please share with us, if anyone would like to work with High Touch Group, find your book, where would they start?
Sure. So they can visit hightouchgroup.com. From there, they can find me. They can find the rest of the team. The book is for sale at all major book retailers. I like to recommend Barnes & Noble if you're an online shopper. It's also at Powell's Books and lots of other places, Amazon and so on. I also am at most industry events, and I am very personable and social. So if you see me at ADLM, at JP Morgan this week, or anywhere else across 2026, please don't hesitate to reach out. I always tell anyone who's listening to the show, I didn't write this book to make money off the book. All the proceeds are donated. But if you can't afford to purchase the book, please just email my team, info@elizabethschabe.com, and somebody will email you a free PDF copy of the book. Especially if you're a student, a postdoc, or an entrepreneur early stage and you're unfunded, please don't spend money on the book. Email my team. Happy to send you a PDF.
Oh,
that's fantastic.
That's awesome. Very cool. Bravo to you for doing that. Not everyone will give things away. So.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I think bottom line is there's a lot of really good stuff going on out there, and people like you are helping bringing it to the world. So thank you for all your efforts, and I'm really glad to have you on today.
Thank you. This is a great conversation. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Healthcare Uprising. Make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons before you go, and take a moment to think of a friend and hit that share button. You can find us on all the major audio platforms, and we've got video on YouTube if you want to watch us in action.
You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. Just search Healthcare Uprising to find us. And if you're a new company with a cool new product, if you're someone innovating alternative methods for the health and wellness space, or if you have a personal healthcare journey you'd like to share with us here at The Uprising, please email us at healthcareuprising@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you about coming on the show. Well, that's all for this dose of Healthcare Uprising. Until the next time, keep looking for the good in the world, because sometimes it's where you least expect it.
We are not doctors, and we don't play one on TV. If you need medical advice, consult with your physician or a healthcare professional. This has been a Shut Up production.